Hey everyone, welcome to another podcast. That would be a Speed Secrets podcast with today's guest, John Santiago. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ross. It's great to be here.
Yeah. Hey, first remind me and tell listeners what you do in your real life. You know, what is your day job when you're not playing at a racetrack?
I'm actually a college professor. I teach philosophy for the last couple decades, I guess.
Philosophy. How about the philosophy of driving fast cars? Is there a philosophy?
I imagine there are many.
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious as to, obviously I know that's what you do. So I'm kind of like, how does that background influence, your education, your teaching experience? How does that influence what you do at the track in terms of, as a driver? And then because you're heavily involved with instructing classroom and in-car in HPDE, high performance driver education events, how does your education teaching experience, how does that influence the way you look at driving and instructing?
Okay, sure. I kind of take that backwards. The instructing part, since I teach for a living, being in a classroom is pretty native territory for me. I'm comfortable with it, so I do classroom instructing for my main organization. I'm constantly thinking about teaching other folks. That's my whole career is trying to explain to other folks some bizarre abstract concept, from philosophy. So I think I carry that over when I've done my in-car instruction and when I do my classroom instruction. But the subject matter is philosophy, and that particular discipline is highly self-reflective. So I take that over to my driving, and actually what I try to encourage other drivers to do, which is to build that self-reflective, skill set and apply it to their driving as a way to help improve them. I think that along with a kind of need for something very, very concrete and kind of practical. If you imagine the archetype of the philosopher just sitting in his chair with a pipe and thinking abstract thoughts, that kind of thing becomes so, in some cases, so distant and removed and abstract that for me, I feel this draw towards. I once told somebody it's the accountability that really attracts me to a track. When you get out on a racetrack, there's no story that you get to tell when your car is careening off track. There's no excuse. You get to, try to convince the forces of nature that, that no, but there's just absolute accountability. You did something, the car's responding in a way. And I actually like that, because, you can take any topic in philosophy and I can hand you a half a dozen different thinkers who have a different view on something. But when you are there at the limit of traction, they're not really different philosophies on that. You're just at the limit or you're not, and you're either exceeding that limit or you're not. And so I that accountability and practicality of it is really attractive.
Well, that's interesting because I guess there are different driving styles, and hey, Ayrton Senna had a different driving style than Michael Schumacher did. And yet they were incredibly successful. But they have very different driving styles. Is that similar to two philosophers having different ideas?
It probably is, because I think there's a lot of, despite the fact there's one world and we're accountable to that world, there really are just multitudes of ways to approach that world and any given task, any given challenge that's put in front of you. And I think that's what drivers are drawn towards, right? Is, whether it's the challenge that other drivers pose you, or it's just the track itself and your own limitations. We all have a unique way of approaching those challenges. So, the cool thing about accountability is that it's not like singular. It really does depend on the perspective that we bring in our really unique bundle of capacities that we bring to the task.
Well, as you were sitting there going, I was thinking, tennis maybe is actually a more visible way of even thinking about that too, because there are people that hit a one-handed backhand, and some players use a two-handed backhand. Two different styles, two different approaches, but get the same result sometimes. So, and going back, you said self-reflective. Is that different or the same as awareness? Because, one of the things I see a lot of drivers, a challenge I see some drivers have is they're not aware of what they're even doing. And to me, until you're aware of what you're doing, you can't, it's hard to make progress. It's hard to improve without that awareness. Is that the same kind of thing?
I actually think they're different. Because I think the awareness is sort of that very, very in the moment local like intake of an apprehension and understanding that you have of what's going on, what you're doing, what whether what you're thinking or how your hands and feet are moving. The self-reflection is the kind of thing which is possible more. I guess you could think of it as that contemplative moment. Like you go back to the paddock and you sit down and you say, okay, how did that session go? The awareness of the data that you bring into those set of questions. Like, well, I don't know how it went. It sort of felt well. It's like, oh, geez, we're gonna have a hard time now because your awareness was so muted and sort of like numb that we just don't have much to work with. But if we can elevate that awareness and then pump it into a self-reflective practice, now we've got a lot of information to work with, and we can hopefully build our skill set to do something with that information. I think they're uniquely different, but they're absolutely connected.
And would the self-reflection lead to awareness, I guess? Because, one of the things that I ask drivers to do a lot is, after a session, sit down and just ask yourself, on a scale of 1 to 10, how close are the tires to the limit? Is that self-reflection or is that tire reflection? Is it tire reflection? Right. But it does lead to often sometimes the driver will go, oh, actually, right that point, I don't think the tires are anywhere near their limit. And all of a sudden, by doing that, they end up driving faster the next time on track.
Yeah, I definitely think they have a reciprocal effect on one another. I'm actually, I've in my personal experience with this, I've been far more struck with the power of the blank spots. So, if you ask me, how are the tires in this corner? It's when I just draw a blank.
Yeah.
So here I am in the paddock, and you're asking me this question. I'm like, I don't know, and that is this. Okay, I'm in my self-reflection, and that now I realize my awareness in that corner needs to get elevated. So it helps me create a plan, right, for the next time I go out on track.
And that obviously takes some discipline of the ego, right? Because saying I don't know. It hurts, man. I know everything, right? But to say I don't know, that's difficult.
It is, but I think so. In my day job, I'm often dealing with a lot of traditional students. So these are I'm just going to call them kids. They're 18, 19-year-old, right out of high school, and I spend a lot of time teaching them not just the subject matter, but teaching them how to learn. Right. So, teaching them how to do school and stuff. And one of the things that they have to learn, and I think every learner, has to cultivate, is that pushing down the ego and being open to saying, I don't know. That I don't know is not an insult. It's not, self-loathing. It's not, a sign of weakness. It's you have to be capable of recognizing that without all the negative associations if you're going to really, really improve your learning.
Yeah. And the when you're talking about teaching people how to learn, I would say that is my experience is it's one of the things that separates the very, very best from everybody else is that they have learned how to learn, and often they've learned how to learn on their own as well, or they have learned how to use the resources of a coach, instructor, teacher, mentor, whatever, somebody to help them learn as well. How do you teach a driver how to learn?
Wow, there's a couple of things. I mean, so you pointed out two different types of important like learning skill sets. One was learning on your own versus learning from others. I think the first thing well, no, it's not the first thing. It's kind of an ongoing thing, really. All people, drivers included, need to really recognize what their strengths and their weaknesses are with regard to learning. A lot of people overestimate their ability to learn on their own. And some people just haven't realized it yet. They become really, really good at it once they get enough opportunities. And both of those really require different kinds of skills and different attributes. If you're somebody who's just genuinely like you struggle maybe because of attention shortcomings or something like that, but you have a hard time learning on your own, you need to get really good at asking other people for help. And you need to get really good at and it might be for that individual, you have to subordinate your own ego even more because you're going to have to confront other people. You're going to have to look them in the eye and ask them for help and get the resources that you need. So I think there's one of the things that we need to be aware of is what is our own learning style and how does that influence what we need to work on and what resources we can kind of like cultivate. So for drivers, it's this constant process of asking them questions because I don't know those answers to them. I can't look at somebody and say, oh, they're this kind of learner or they're that kind of learner. Even when I have them in my class, all I do is grade papers and things like that. So that's kind of, I can see the outcome of their work, but that's different from seeing how they learned and whether they were learning in an optimal way or not.
So you mentioned learning style, and years ago I did a ton of reading. One of my learning styles is figuring things out on my own and reading and studying other things, and that's the best way I learn because then I go, how does that apply? And I figure things out that way. But I'd read all this information about learning styles and things, and when I got involved in teaching performance driving, all different types, I was really, I guess, hyper aware of somebody's learning style and trying to figure out, wow, how am I going to connect with this person? And then through the years, I've read more and more research that says, really, we don't have that strong a difference in our learning styles. And, this whole learning style theory is outdated. We need to update that to saying that, we all learn the same, and throw away the whole learning style thing. What's your thoughts on that? Because, well, this is your world. What does the latest research say? And what do you believe is true? Do we have different learning styles?
I think that term is overused, especially not so much the frequency, but the significance of it. So, it's like if you have a style, it somehow pigeonholes you into, one method of learning, or only opens one door for, a way of learning. So I use the term really lightly.
Okay.
My approach has been more exploratory. Whether we have like really clearly defined styles, learning styles is of less interest to me. And I haven't seen that personally in my experience, with my students. What I have seen is one particular technique or one particular method or something like that, those will resonate more with a certain percentage of the population than it does with others. And my thought is, if it works for you, then you should use it. Um, what's going to work for you? Can we group it into a learning style? Maybe, but I'm really kind of less interested in that. I'm more interested in just, let's find stuff that works for you, and recognize the stuff that you have a lot of trouble with, and start making decisions about what kind of other constraints do we have on our time and our resources and our energy, and get the most out of our learning effort. So for me, it's really much more about trying to experiment with a lot of different methods and find the methods and the techniques that work. It's one of the reasons I really like having other people present material, even that I'm sort of, presenting, because, two people talking about the exact same thing will just use a slightly different turn of phrase or a slightly different, kind of imagery. And that will work for some people that aren't captured by the way I might present something.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating when somebody says, "Oh, the way you explained something, it clicked." And you're like, "Really?" Said it exactly the same way he said it. But yeah, or vice versa. Like somebody will say, "Man, I didn't get it when you were talking about this, but Bill or Debbie over here explained it to me," and all of a sudden it clicked. So I think that's sort of one of the cool things. And I'm hoping that people listening to this are going, "How do I apply this to my driving?" And think about maybe if you're trying to learn something and it's not clicking, then you've got to find somebody else that can explain it to you, or find some other resource. It could be somebody, it could be, watch a video or something like that, that's going to make that thing click. Right.
Yeah. I find that expression so like fascinating. Like, it clicked with me.
Right.
I think it's somewhat, it creates a kind of misleading emphasis on the aha moment, right? Because that's the click.
Good point.
And I actually think that it's less frequent that some random thing will just create an aha moment versus the accumulation and the buildup of your continual effort to try to unravel some puzzle. So take you way back when I was, when I was tutoring. This is before I even was in grad school. I had some success explaining things to other people, and sometimes my students would say, you explain it better than the professor. And I always felt that was totally unfair to the professor, because I thought, you just sat there for, the whole week listening to the professor lecture, felt like you didn't understand it, and then I swoop in and say something, and you're like, aha. And I'm like, that's not just me. It can't just be me. You were there the whole week trying to process this. So I think, so for drivers who are trying to improve their driving, there is a certain sense of, you need to keep chipping away at this. And when you have those aha moments, it's really important for you to recognize what helped you have that aha moment, but don't discount the other efforts that you are making to try to unravel it, because I think it really is contributing to, that sudden recognition or understanding that you call aha.
Aha, John. That was it. It just clicked for me. You explained what see, you did it.
Right. It was all me.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, so, I could totally geek out on the, digging into the, whatever you want to call this conversation around how we learn and the best ways to learn and kind of the philosophy of it all and all that kind of stuff. But I'm curious, how did you get started in this sport? Like what triggered it for you?
It was a mistake.
Well, we all know that.
It was right.
Yeah.
So I had, I had picked up a new car, and this was the first car I'd ever bought brand new. So it was a Mustang, and I wanted to enjoy it. And I was never into the whole kind of grunting, go fast in a straight line. I always enjoyed driving on a nice country road. So I was looking for an autocross event. I was doing a search for a local autocross, and I didn't really know what autocross was. So, so I kind of stumbled onto this club that was going up to a track, and I thought that was autocross. Turned out to not be autocross. So I got into road racing sort of that way. But it was mostly because of a car. And I think that's maybe, for a lot of your listeners, it's similar. It's like you have the car, you want to do something with it, then something more interesting than polish it. So let's go drive this sucker.
Well, one of the things that I've, and it's something I've been really kind of asking people about over the past few years, is just, that moment. And I'm not saying it's a aha click moment, but there, a lot of people will go, hey, when I was a kid, I got the Hot Wheels of so-and-so car, and just the shape of that car, I fell in love with that shape or something. Or, for me, one of the things, and there were multiple things, but one of the things for me was, I was walking down a sidewalk with a buddy when we were like 8, 9, 10 years old or something like that. And out of the corner of my eye, this yellow flash went by me, and it was a Lotus Europa. And it was bright yellow, and it went down to a 90-degree corner, and it went around a corner like it was on a slot car track. It just like, boom, around this corner. I'm like, whoa, how did that happen? And it's why today I still love Lotus. There is certain things, and kind of maybe related to the professor thing. For me, there was multiple things, but I'm just fascinated by this. Like, why did you buy a Mustang?
It was at the time, I think it was the best I could afford. It was very practical. Mustang's not practical. It's kind of a funny way to describe it, but it was the car that was within grasp. It was the best that I could achieve. But I do recall, it's interesting that you mentioned that story about when you were younger. The first time I saw a Lamborghini on the street, this was, decades ago. And I remember it was not going fast. It was actually kind of just going normal speed, but it seemed to somehow like glide across the road in this almost ghost-like way. And it just turned a simple left corner, and it seemed to just float through that corner like nothing I'd ever seen before. It was the most unusual experience, but it's that kind of thing that's always attracted me, that like the movement, the carving through space, that's the thing that always really attracted me. So when I did get this car, I did pick it because this was one of the newer Mustangs that was touted for having a really rigid chassis. And I thought, well, if I'm going to get something, I want something that I can build on. And I knew that this had just, it was a quantum leap forward in terms of the Mustang world.
How about the sound? So often I hear somebody go, the first time I heard a Porsche go by, or the sound of a Ferrari engine, or a big V8 ship, big American V8 engine, or, some high pitched 4-cylinder or something like that. So how about the sound?
Yeah. I didn't grow up heavy into cars. I didn't get into cars until I was probably around 18 or so. But when I did, it was all about the American V8. So, so I have always been drawn to that sort of, deeper, more guttural kind of sound. To me, that's my association with like power, So anytime I've heard something that's more refined, I always have a kind of respect for it. But at the same time, I'm like, yeah, but where's that meanness, that you hear in a big old V8?
Yeah. It's funny. And I have heard or read or somewhere that, first of all, our number one sense that triggers memories is our sense of smell, but our second is sound. I don't know if that's true or not, but I've heard that and or seen or read that. But so visually we might see something, but there's that sound of the engine, and of course the smell or taste or something like that. But it's hard to taste cars.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And when you can, it usually means something very bad.
Yeah.
So.
you don't want that. So yeah.
Right.
Hey, obviously, I mean, you and I met through the HPDE, high performance driver education world of instructing and things, and through Eric Meyer and the instructor summit and all that kind of stuff. So, we've spent a ton of time talking about instruction and being a better instructor, but also as a driver, how do we use that instruction as well? I'm curious because, well, I don't know. How many drivers do you think that you have instructed on the track, whether they're in your classroom at the track or you're in car with them? Ballpark. Is it tens? Is it hundreds? Is it thousands?
It's going to be high hundreds, possibly cresting 1,000. I would put it in that general ballpark.
How long have you been doing the HPDE instructing thing?
Oh, it's been about, what has it been, 11, 12 years? Somewhere around there.
And, one of the things that I have seen is, when I first connected with Eric Meyer and the work that you guys have been doing with the Great Lakes NASA region has been, I say it's a bit of a role model for what a lot of organizations could do. And to be fair, there are other organizations around the country who are doing a fantastic job as good, but there are a lot of organizations that are not doing as good a job. And I think one of the things that I've seen is the way you guys grow drivers, from the beginning of HPDE up through the ranks. And if drivers want to go into time trials or road racing or instructing, it's like you've identified them early and you give them the tools to grow as far as they want. And I think that's something that's not enough organizations do. Was that a conscious, deliberate, hey, we're going to do this? Or was it something you kind of stumbled into, do you think?
I think it was, I would say it's very conscious, very deliberate, from a very early point. So we revamped the program about 6 years ago. Or I should say we started to revamp the program about 6 years ago. The first solid 2 years was heavy edits, let's say. Like we said, early on, we did have a curricular mindset. And so I want to say, having a curriculum means that you have a sense of your end goal objectives. And then you lay out your intermediary, lessons and stuff like that. So when people talk about curriculum, they're not simply talking about the list of topics or the list of subjects that you might study. They're talking about a coherent plan. And we did have that in mind very, very early on. We didn't exactly know how to pull it off. And so the first couple of years was very experimental. We tried things, we evaluated whether we thought it was working or not. We ditched a whole bunch of stuff. But we did know, and we were fortunate in that respect that we knew that our organization had two sides of the house. It had a competition side and it had an instruction side. And so we knew that we had a goal. We had a clear goal. We had to generate competitors, either wheel-to-wheel racers or time trial drivers. That gave us our North Star. And then we just traced our way back. And we kept, working on how do you trace your way back? If that's what you want to build, then what are the intermediate steps to get you there from scratch, right? From a driver who walks in the door and has never been on a racetrack before. I think for drivers who are out there, and they're not part of an organization, I think it's really useful for them to be spending some time thinking about, what do I really want to do with this hobby? What are my goals? Because it makes it a lot easier once you have a clearer sense. And that can change, and you have to be open to allow that to continually evolve. But if you've got your mind on that, then it's easier to make sense of what to do with your resources today.
It's interesting. It seems so obvious to start with the end in mind, right? And yet I think, and I'm putting my hand up here. You can see me raising my hand, right? Saying that when I first started teaching track driving, and that was 1980, 40 years ago, the first time I taught somebody on a track how to drive. And and then went along and had a school and all that kind of stuff. But, in the beginning, it was like, hey, I want to talk about how you use the controls. Hey, I want to talk about where you look. Hey, I want to talk about the line through a corner. I want to talk about weight transfer and traction and everything. That's what my curriculum was, what I wanted to talk about. And I think, that's probably not far off of what a lot of curriculums are. It's, hey, what do we want to talk about? As opposed to, what does a driver need to get to there? And I think that is just a great lesson that you guys have taken on.
Yeah, it's really, however many goofy things we've tried and whatever, however many missteps we've had, that's been the thing that has really helped keep us grounded and keep us coming back. Is having a sense of how do we achieve that goal.
So you teach, you do a lot of the classroom sessions, but you've spent a lot of time in car and everything. What are some of the, I guess, the good traits, the most common good traits that the best drivers you've experienced? And from beginners, novice coming into the HPDE world to drivers that you've worked with who are more advanced that are into racing and things like that. What are some of the traits that you see that the best ones have?
It's kind of a combination of humility and hunger. The best drivers I've seen, they I've seen some really, really successful drivers, who've, especially early on, they're at the front of the pack and they're passing everybody and all this kind of stuff. And they just don't seem to care. It's because they're hungry for like more. It's almost like they're dismissive of that. They're like, yeah, whatever. I need to know. I'm still working on this, and so it's that kind of like, it's just not, they're not feeding the ego, right? They're almost just like turning around and just saying, yeah, but if I could spend all day, stroking myself and feeling good and patting myself on the back and whatnot, but that's going to take me away from learning something new and something more and getting better at this. So the best ones I've seen have just been really humble about whatever they're doing out on track. And then just like, I've seen some ravenously hungry drivers that just want to know more. And I'm looking at them, I'm like, you're doing great. You're doing amazing. And they're like, yeah, but, and they just keep gnawing away at it. That's probably the trait that jumps out the most.
Well, and I think the very best, that never goes away. I was talking recently with Colin Brown, who's, one of the top sports car drivers in the world, could drive anything. And, I started coaching him when he was 12. He's now, 31 or something like that. And, the very top of the game in IMSA prototype cars. He calls me up and goes, I've been thinking about what I'm doing with, and I'm not going to get into the details to share that with him, talk to him about that on the podcast. But, he's looking at how to fine tune what he's doing with his driving technique. And as I shared in a conversation with him for the podcast is, I remember seeing this story in the graphs around Tiger Woods when Tiger Woods was at his peak, and how when he was at the very best, like his best season ever early in his career, at the end of that season, he chose to change his swing, the way he swung the club. And that actually hurt him for some period of time. But I can't remember if it was the next year or 2 years after that, where he actually won more tournaments again, better than that first peak. So his second peak was better. And then at that peak, he chose to change his swing again, and his performance tapered off a little bit, but then he hit another peak. So the very best, right when they're at their very best, are not afraid to make a change for the better.
Yeah, it's interesting that like I'm always fascinated with sort of human excellence. Like anything that anybody does that they do exceptionally well is something that's just attractive. But I think there's always this focus on the kind of outcome portion of it, like
Yeah.
they won, right? They hit it farther than this person, or they won this many, events and whatnot. It's really the more interesting thing to really look at, though, is like how they got themselves there. And that's when you start to realize there's a lot of this commonality in the attributes that they're bringing. They're not sort of born these specimens, right? They build themselves up to that through a process that, I mean, I guess one way you could describe it is kind of an ugly process. It's like, it's a lot of let's try this. Let's have a huge amount of patience, I think, of some sort, that they can tolerate those kinds of like, okay, that didn't work, but there's still something that I'm exploring here. And they keep at it, probably longer than most of the rest of us mere mortals.
And I don't like to focus on the negative too much, but I asked you what the best traits, so the good traits of the best drivers are. Let's flip that around. What are some of the bad traits that you see drivers coming into the sport? Coming in and staying in the sport for a while. What are some of the bad traits?
Well, I think overwhelmingly it's a focus on the wrong things.
What wrong
usually
things?
Well, it's like the equipment, right? So the famous, I have this Uber car, so I should be in the advanced,
Right,
group.
right.
So it's like they, or, I need to go faster, so I need to increase my horsepower. I need to get the supercharger, or I'm having trouble braking, so I need to drop, $3,000 on a brake kit. So that it's, or in some cases, even when we start to, because we're, the whole time we're sort of wrestling with them to turn them in their focus. They'll look at, oh, well, this was my lap time, and it's, it's this totally crude measurement, of just like, okay, well, that's how fast I went around the track. So it's focusing on the wrong thing. And then, the flip side to that is that wrestling with them to turn their attention. There's a lot of drivers who come in and they've focused on that initially because, advertising and whatnot, but they quickly realize and they quickly learn that, oh, that's not where it's at, right? I can get so much more out of this sport, this hobby, out of my car, out of myself, if I look somewhere else. So it's not just focusing on the wrong thing, but kind of also not being open to some discovery. Whether it's because they feel that they know it all, or because they don't trust whoever they're is conveying this to them, or I don't know, but there's a resistance to that.
It's a shame that we don't have a data tool, a stopwatch even, that measures performance. Like basically all data does, and a stopwatch is a form of data acquisition, right? All it does is it measures results, but it doesn't measure performance. And as any race driver knows, there are times that you can win a race but feel like you didn't drive all that well, and other times that you finished 3rd or 10th and you went, man, that was the best I've ever driven. And that's performance. So it's just, I wish we could kind of push that little thing on the dash, and at the end of it, it comes back and says, that was a 99.97, or man, you suck today. That was an 89. But we don't have that yet. And I say,
yeah. And you have to really extrapolate, when you are looking at some sort of data metric, you have to bring to bear to it a good amount of understanding to try to extrapolate what the performance really was. Even something as simple as or not as simple, but as complicated as your memory, as your recollection of what was happening. You can look at a piece of data and say, wow, look at I went through there faster than ever before. And your recollection of it might be, that you were being reckless, right? You were throwing caution to the wind. And I wouldn't actually think that was, great performance, you being angry, right? Or, well, that driver just ticked me off and, I just threw it in there. but how you use that self-reflection is part of how you're trying to gauge what your real performance was. And this is across all formats of learning. It's one of the things that we're teaching kids and my students. Your grade is going to be a reflection of the work that was submitted, but don't confuse that with what you really learned and how you grew in this class. That's the kind of performance analog in academic setting.
So it kind of comes full circle to what we were talking about in the beginning. It's, there is a way to, while we don't have a stopwatch or a data system that's going to measure our performance, the self-reflection building is one way of measuring your performance. If you sit back afterwards and ask yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, how well did I perform today? Again, not the result, but how well did I perform everything? Because we also know that, in our sport, there are these other factors, right? There's track conditions, there's car conditions. You could drive fantastic on a set of really old tires and not get as good a lap time result, but you drove better. So, like you said in the beginning, it's that self-reflection piece that maybe all of us as drivers need to focus on a bit more.
I think so. I think that's really. I think the drivers, there's a close second to the best drivers, right? You asked, what's this quality the best drivers have, and a close second to that is that self-reflection that it seems to attract a lot of people who end up doing fairly well, because there's so much there to reflect upon. The well is so deep, it seems like it shouldn't be. It's a 15-minute session on track or something, but good Lord, you could spend the next hour and a half or 2 hours or however long till the next session really just diving into that. And there's so much there to reflect upon. And I think ultimately that's what we're looking for, is a better understanding of our performance.
Of course, we could also go too far and get caught up in all that and forget that, hey, we're here at the track to have fun. And sometimes we can, maybe, can we over-reflect?
Yeah. So self-reflection is not like a purely good thing, right? It's not. It's just a tool, and of course, you can. I suppose there's plenty of people out there who use that tool to self-flagellate and sort of beat
Right.
themselves up and use the tool pretty abusively. But the interesting thing is that same tool is part of what helps you recognize that tendency might be starting to emerge. That same tool is what helps you recognize that you're there to have fun, and that that fun is an equal and worthy goal as other goals that you might have for the weekend. Yeah, so I think it's really just sort of an underlying tool. It's like a core tool that we need to use, and if it becomes crippling, then you need to kind of like put it away and take a deep breath.
Well, so I have 2 more questions then, and then I'll let you get back to teaching kids about philosophy. But so where does judgment fit into self-reflection? Because is that if I say, man, I suck today, that's a judgment to me. But if I said, here are some things that I did well, here are some things I could do better, and here's how I would do it better, that to me is more, that I guess that's my picture of self-reflection. So where does judgment fit into this thing? Or does it?
Well, possibly, so you're talking to a philosopher, Ross.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So
that's why I'm asking.
Right. So terminology becomes sort of like that's our trade, right? Is looking at terminology. For me, to judge, to evaluate, those are we're really talking about the same thing. The question is what is it that you are evaluating, and how does it connect to how does it connect to the possibilities that you see moving forward. So put this in the framework of a a closed mindset versus a growth mindset. If I evaluate my performance, then that opens me up to, if I judge my performance, I didn't, I was not paying any attention whatsoever to how I released the brakes, right? I come off the track and I realize, wow, yeah, I don't, what happened? That was terrible. I wasn't aware at all of what I was doing with my foot. I can say that was terrible. That was awful, but what am I evaluating? I'm just evaluating my actual performance, and that opens me up to, to change. But if what I evaluate is me, if I say I'm a lousy driver, I just, my foot's just no good at this. Now that's like the opposite of a growth mindset, right?
Right.
So when it becomes like a judgment that crystallizes, a conception of the future, a conception of our possibility, then I think that this is the kind of judgment that we should avoid. But any other judgment that doesn't have that kind of crystallization, that continues to allow us to cultivate a growth mindset, all of those judgments are going to be fair game, even when they come down, perhaps heavy-handed, with some colorful language. So.
Yeah. This is interesting stuff. Yeah, I could spend all day talking to you about this stuff. But final question. What's your one piece of advice for drivers, your speed secret for people listening to this show to help them perform better?
Okay, so, I'm a fan of the show, so I knew you were asking this. And
darn,
so
I shouldn't have told you that. No.
So, I have to say, I'm thinking about my own career and like, when did I have, like, what have been some of the most powerful growth moments for me? And it does actually come back to this, know yourself. It's the thing that really draws me into the sport. And I found that data, and looking at data has helped me recognize more of what I was really doing on track and what I was really responding to. So I guess my speed circuit is, find a way, continue to work to find ways to become aware of what you're doing on track, so that you can use that to make whatever judgment you need to make, but to make it in a way that helps you move forward. For me, it was data.
So know yourself, find ways to become aware of how you can improve.
Yeah.
I'm writing that down, by the way. I've been waiting for yours.
Okay.
And it's interesting that, data really connected to you. There's the stereotypical, the philosopher as being very, I would say not caught up in the details of a data system of some squiggly lines on a screen. And yet that's what connected for you.
Oh yeah, because the squiggly lines, they begin to reveal, your heart, so real quick, and I don't want to, get too deep into this, but, so for me, there's always, the big data pieces like the speed trace and whatnot. But when I started to look more carefully at the throttle, trace, that's like a window into your mind. And for me, it was just like, I was like, oh my goodness, I can see when I look at my own throttle trace, at least I can see when I got scared. I can see when I was, hesitant, when I was second guessing myself. And then you can compare that and correlate that to, what was the car physically doing? What was it conditioned? And there have been, I can't tell you how many times I've looked at that and I've literally just jumped back off the desk and said, why were you so, why were you so freaked out? And I need to know that. I need to know why I was reacting and responding in that way. And that's how I make connections, So for me, the data is just another tool that really helps you know yourself. Like, what is it that you are going to need to gather what information, what knowledge, what understanding do you need to gather in yourself so that you can go out and perform better. That level of specificity and detail, I think, is often useful in that self-exploration.
The line that you said, the data is a window into your mind. It's kind of a window into your belief, your self-confidence, which I guess is stored somewhere in your mind. Who knows? So, John, this has been really, really interesting. Like I said, I could talk about this kind of stuff with you all day long, which we will do again. So thanks for being on the show. Please keep helping people learn. I'd say, it's certainly one of your superpowers, right? And, so use your superpowers for good and not evil. And, so again, thanks for being on the show, and, keep having fun.
Thank you, Ross. Thanks for having me.
Here's a reminder, if you want to continue learning, Ross has some excellent recorded webinars that you can purchase and download from the Speed Secrets website. One of the most interesting and informative is the session titled Data for Drivers. It's more than 2 hours of content, with many examples that take the mystery out of data. In fact, the webinar is pretty much a collection of real-life examples. And as the title indicates, it's for drivers, not just engineers and data gurus. When Ross did it live, he thought it would be only for relatively inexperienced data users. They loved it. But a big surprise arrived. Ross heard from many very experienced data users that they learned a lot from it too. So whether you are a data novice or a data devotee, check out the Data for Drivers by going to speedsecrets.com/webinars. And remember, once you download it, it's yours forever, so you can keep learning and having fun.